about culture and how we make it work.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Culture REfit. I'm Carol Watson, your host, and this is season one. In season one, we really wanted to unpack and get into what does culture mean? What does culture mean to us personally? What does it mean in the workplace around the world? We have a global community we're building. One of the things that I'm really excited about is for this conversation. We have a guest on today that's going to take us to some of the areas and questions that we've been curious about. What happens in the room where it happens? What are the conversations that C-suite leaders are having about culture and change? So Ron Thomas is a global CHRO of workforce architect. We see so many conversations about generational differences and working in different countries. And as people think about what they want for their career, what is it like to work in APAC region or in the Middle East or in other areas of the world? And how do I need to change up my style to navigate those dynamics? We also wanted to see, well, what are the trends? How are companies thinking about refitting culture and thinking about this next generation and what they really want? Our guest today is going to tackle a lot of those things, and there are many, many gold nuggets of tips that he's going to leave throughout. But stay tuned to the end to hear his most favorite tip that I think all of you will be able to appreciate. He's a leadership strategist and has worked for all different types of companies, from family-owned to startups and multinationals around the world, and as a global executive advisor in Dubai, spent many, many years in Dubai, from New York, and has worked across APAC, particularly in Singapore. Ron is a globally recognized executive advisor and leadership strategist. He works across the Middle East, he works across Africa and North America, and particularly in Asia. He's done 100 global keynotes, it's probably more than that, in 30 plus countries. You can find him all over social media. He's a big proponent of building a brand, and he'll be sharing more thoughts around that. How we influence workforce systems. It's the system that's getting in the way. So he'll talk a little bit more about what does that even mean? What's a workforce system and what do we need to change? So thank you, Ron, for joining us in this conversation. Glad to have you here. We want to have a fluid conversation. We've known each other for, I don't know how long. I was looking at Thrive Talks and I realized that they're still on YouTube. It was at least 12 years ago.
Yes.
So I wanted to start the conversation by talking about your journey, the milestones as a senior C-suite leader, Black American man coming from the US and moving to Dubai. What was the culture shock? This is about Culture REfit and how we navigate. What surprised you the most in that shift when you came so long ago?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I think the major shift was coming from one culture and having a mindset, a New York City mindset, and coming to an Arabic country where there were more structures and rules in place. Whereas New York was kind of freelance. You try this and you try this and you do those kind of things. The realization of the moment came when I was sitting in a board meeting and I was referencing a solution, a strategic solution, and I was referencing New York and how we did it in New York. Da, da, da. And the CEO pulled me aside after the meeting was over. He said, one of the things I want you to really work on is that you're not in New York anymore. It's great to have it as a reference point, but you're here. And we tend to do it a little differently. That was like a aha moment for me. So I ended up in Saudi Arabia because I was working for Xerox in a job that I did not like. And I came in one morning and there was a an email from an executive search firm based in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, inquiring of as to whether I would be interested in competing for a job as the CHRO for a company in Riyadh. And I jumped at the opportunity. So lots of times people say, "Oh my God, I would love to do that." I said, "Okay, here's the scenario. You get an email tomorrow from an executive search firm and says, 'Let's go through the next steps. Are you interested?' Would you say yes, or would there be a big question mark?" I said I didn't hesitate, and I moved in on it, went through the process, and 5 or 6 weeks later, I get the offer. And about a month later, I'm on a flight from JFK flying to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Totally different culture. And it was the best decision I've ever made. And that comes back to just exploring opportunities for people that are doing a job and they don't really like the job. What would you like to explore? Explore something, figure out something that you really, really enjoy. And uh, this is what I really get from the younger generation. They're trying things. They've become digital artists. They're becoming all these kinds of content creators, influencers. Never went to college with a marketing degree, but they're trying things, and all of a sudden things open up. So you have to explore. If you go back through history, from the Henry Fords on up that designed something, they were just exploring something. And I think that's lost lots of times because we get into, and I'm not knocking 4 years of education because I teach at a university here in Dubai, American University in the Emirates. I want to mention them. But that's kind of an older model. Will you be able to quench your thirst by doing that? Or are you choosing a major based on friends, based on family? But is there a thirst for doing that? And I think this is a big question that families are going to have these discussions with their kids. And for the younger people, try something. There's a young lady in my town in Verona, New Jersey, had an idea. She loved to cook, and she opened a sandwich shop. And an influencer came by there to eat. The lines every day. We've never seen lines like this in this town for business. Degrees and everything, but she could still be in a company. Is it 5 o'clock yet? Doing that, or she tried something and it worked. So that's my response to that.
It's interesting. You're bringing me back to my executive recruiter days at Tangerine Watson, and one of the things that's interesting from a cultural perspective, and I talk about cultures of color, whether it was Latin, Black, Asian cultures there, the connection to family, the expectations of taking care of family and being around family is very strong. And there were people when I was recruiting that were in Detroit that didn't want to even come to New York. We couldn't get them to go to Chicago because of the connections of family. I remember when I was wanting to go to university across the country, and my family said, "Oh, you don't know anybody there. We don't have anybody there. You can't go that far." And so, because this is about culture, I think, so many people that are in families and cultures that don't really understand that concept of moving away from family and moving away from support and feeling like, well, I'm the only in this company anyway. Who is going to be there in this country that I can build community around? I see that with especially Black Americans that are moving to different places or thinking about even traveling. The first thing they say, well, is there a community there? Is it safe? Am I going to be comfortable as a person of color, as a Black person? So I want to dig into the stuff that we don't talk about a lot because you picked up and moved somewhere where you didn't have Black community, and that might not have been important to you, and it's not important to everyone.
Yeah.
But because where I see it often whether it's, Brazilian and Latin. I think the only culture that is comfortable being anywhere in the world are Nigerians. The running joke is if you don't find Nigerians in a country, then it's probably not a country you want to be in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's probably the one unique culture that is comfortable being anywhere, anywhere in the world. But from a career perspective, can you talk a little bit about that? Because when you're already the only in a company, taking that chance without support systems, especially for women, and especially for women that have kids, it becomes, the intersections of culture and identity make it even more complicated. What did you wrestle with? What have you heard? What have you seen that we don't know in that move?
I didn't wrestle with anything. I was ready to do that, and I'll give you a reason why. My mother um, was one of the smartest people that I know. My mother and father, and it was like going to class every night when you got home from school. And we lived in a small town in South Carolina during that era, and I'll leave it at that. But one of the things she told us: leave this town and go out. Leave. And my father would say, when you get the degree, you walk off the stage, don't look this way, go the other way. So it's always been kind of my mindset I want to explore because the situation in Saudi Arabia did not work out. It was a family owned business, and I'm a strategic kind of person, and they wouldn't allow me to see certain things. So they basically had me as a quota for a governmental contract they had. And I'm doing process stuff. They wanted me to process visas. I said, I didn't travel 7,000 miles to process visas. I don't do process visas. Well, you can be the head of training. I said, I was the head of training at IBM. So why should I be doing? So I knew it wasn't going to work out. So again, building a network. I built a network of people. I let them know it wasn't working out. And I was thinking about moving back if you hear of anything. And lo and behold, the CEO for a great place to work at that time, the global CEO, was a good friend of mine. She says, oh my God. She said, there's a situation in Dubai and they're looking for a CEO. So right away, I'm thinking, well, I understand strategy, I understand HR. CEO never really looked at that. Could I step up to the plate? And I'm thinking, I've sat in a room with CEOs, I've sat in a room with board members. You don't intimidate me. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try it. And I tried it and I got the job. And that's when I moved here, being in Dubai today. And I moved here and started that work to try and build this out, all those kind of things. But again, that did not work out. The board and I had issues. And as I was driving home one day, I heard an ad on the radio and it said, get a business license in 24 hours. And when I got home, I went online, checked it out, did what I needed to do. And the next day, I applied for a business license. I got the business license. I left that job because as I moved here, I was going around speaking at all of these big conferences and all of these kinds of things. People would come by and give me a business card. Said, I would love to talk with you because we're having problems here. But when you come in as an expat, you can't. If your visa is aligned to a company, you can't do outside work. I mean, you can do it illegally, but I said I'm not going to try that. When I decided to make that move, I reached back out to people and I started working from the next week until COVID and just built up a business traveling all over and everything was going fine. And then COVID hit. COVID was kind of like the reawakening of not only from a health perspective, but COVID disrupted the entire world. And then you figure AI has come in on top of that, but I'll get to that later. So what happened with that is that I decided to close the business down, relocate back to New York, and then I'd fly in as was needed because there was no business for like 6 months. And I had people on payroll. I didn't lay people off. I said, I may not be able to give you your full salary, but we'll keep it working and we'll keep doing. They stuck with me. And as it started opening back up, I I'm always on a flight, and I'm in the process now of looking to move back permanently.
What did you learn? We're going to get into the work that you're doing, but I wanted to kind of just dig in a little bit more about how business gets done in Saudi Arabia versus Dubai versus the US.
Mm.
What have you learned over the years about how you navigate and what the cultural differences are?
It's the context of the culture, and you realize that as the more work that you do in various countries. I was in Asia leading a conference, and I tend to use my hands a lot, and I was doing this and doing this kind of talking. And one piece of the feedback came a piece of the feedback came back that said, in our culture, we don't use your hand because the way you position your hand was a negative impact. So you learn from these things. So being around a while, as I said, tomorrow night I leave and I'm in Jakarta, Indonesia for a week. So I've worked in all of these countries across, from APAC to Middle East to Europe. I've been there, done that. So I tend to know the nuances of it. But you learn that over a period of time, and you learn that from not being the person who knows everything and not being willing to listen. You listen for feedback. You listen for suggestions. You talk to, if I'm speaking at a conference, I say, give me an audience profile of the people in the conferences because I want to make sure I can connect with each one. I want to make sure I don't say the wrong thing. And this is the challenge. This is the key point that I learned from Saudi. The CEO says, "Hey, Ron, you're not in New York anymore. You know, a second. We did this in New York. We did this." He said, "This ain't New York, man."
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's so many things that you said that I could relate to. Going from New York to London, I was anxious to have an outside of New York experience.
Yeah.
And so moving to London, even though they speak English, how they navigate in the workplace, there's subtle differences.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding the subtle differences, not only in tone, and I'm a hands person too.
Yeah.
And so I've had to learn, not so much in London, but in many countries, you're not, using your hands a lot. How you speak, how you communicate is very critical.
Yeah.
And you've been very fortunate to have had great feedback because often people either are not told or they're not there's no support to help them navigate those cultural differences. We have an episode coming up really talking about, I don't know if you're familiar with Culture Map, but we'll leave it in the description. We have a speaker coming that's going to share with us all of the different dynamics around communication and decision making and time and relationship among different countries to help our audience really kind of unpack what that looks like.
For myself, working in when I go to Saudi Arabia, it's just like I'm one of them because I understand the culture and I'm accepted because I've lived there and I can relate to them certain instances, certain kind of things that Saudis would do or say, and I can use those phrases, and we all laugh. When if you're in Saudi and we say we're gonna start at 3:30, that may mean 4:30. So once I figured out timings, the structure is flexible. If I'm running a session, I said, "Oh, we're gonna go for lunch now, and we're gonna be back at 1:30," and everybody would laugh because everybody knew what that was. Because they knew they weren't going to come back at 1:30. So whereas if I'm in Europe, I say 1:30, 1:29, people are already in the room. So small things like that, and you pick up these things, but you have to be open. And this is what I say: people that want to live the life as an expat, you have to be open to just listening.
So my favorite line in Hamilton is being in the room where it happens. And so we want to get back to some of the rooms that you've been in and the conversations you've had specifically around culture, the workforce, the people, and the evolution and where organizations are transforming to or not. I know it varies by country and organization and across industries, but can you talk a little bit about the conversations that you've had with the C-suite, the rooms where it's happening, about how they think about culture?
Okay, there's a two-prong approach. Let me come back to me entering a room. The most important thing that you can learn as an aspiring executive or whatever it is that you want to be is learn how to read a room. And I say read a room, you're seeing who's talking, you're seeing who everyone is gravitating towards, you see who is just a lot of fluff, and you have to learn how to navigate that leadership. I never make assumptions. I may look at something or look at someone who's talking and I'm trying to figure out, so what is the motivation behind that? But I may need to explore that person later. If I were in a boardroom and I was giving a presentation, I'm going to watch who's taking notes. I'm going to watch who's sitting there with their arms folded, looking like this at me. And that may mean a deeper dive into that person. That could be over coffee. That could be over, let's you and I have lunch. I said, I noticed that you were taking notes. And this curious, what did I say that you found interesting enough to take a note? So I use that to
Ah, that's a
explore.
good
So when
one.
I don't, I go back to not making assumptions, but when you can read a room and you see people reacting certain ways, if it's interesting, and if that person is perceived as a leader or the next level of the leader coming up, and I need to sell a solution, I need to get as many people on board. And this is what I look for. So I say that for a C-suite board, but I can be a manager inside of an organization. And I can go to my boss or a ring of bosses. It's the same skill in doing that. One other story I didn't mention, and I'm not going to take you through all of this. My first job as a kid was like in the eighth grade. I started working in a barbershop. And it was so profound. I wrote an article on this from the barbershop to the boardroom. I'll share that with you if you wanted to take a look. But
We'll share it with our audience.
what I learned from that was that when you were at a barbershop, a black barbershop, it's just stories. And I'm listening, I'm listening. I know who the key players are. I know who the ones that just talk. They're just glad to be out of the house. And I think that skill was enough to enable me to navigate any situation I'm in. Because I
Yeah, I
want
haven't figured out whether black barbershops are, it's a very specific black American thing.
to, yes, it is.
But having gotten my hair cut, I've been to women's beauty shops
Yes.
and gone to black American barbershops, and it is an education. The topics that they talk about, the politics, dynamics, and relationships, they sometimes will quiet down when I would come in because they didn't want to have to get really into it. But it felt like it was an education. I was a sponge. So I know what you mean. Are the barbershops the same in different countries that you go
No,
in? Do you
no,
find that
it's
same
totally different. You go in
education?
and get your hair cut, and you get your ass, you leave.
Yes.
So
I
that's
get my hair cut now by
so.
a woman that's Angolan, and she
Think of
gives me a
this.
lot.
You said when you walked in, they would be quiet. They were reading the room. They saw a woman coming in. They said, "Okay, let's calm
Yes.
down to see how far we can go." That's all it was. These brothers had skills and never finished. A lot of them never finished high school, but they had the
Yep.
skills, the innate skills to understand different customers coming in. And it may not sync with what I'm trying to say. Let's just calm down for a minute. We'll continue on a general conversation, and then we'll see. We'll watch the way maybe she laughed. Oh, she laughed at something. We can go a little deeper, and you learn those key skills. And when you're trying to sell an idea of a solution. When I do a strategy class, and I said, what happens when you go to the board and you're trying to sell the board on an idea? You're new coming into the room. You've got 7 individuals sitting there. They don't know you from Adam. How do you begin the process of convincing them or providing them with a solution that they want to buy? And I say the key to that is that you tell a story. You tell a story about how you're viewing what we're going through, but it has to be something that connects the people. And when you do that, you see, oh, someone says, oh, I love it. Someone laughs. Oh my God. But what you're doing is you're bringing them in before you go to slides. I always tell people, I'm trying to look for a clicker. This clicker for PowerPoint, forget about it. Use it as a backdrop, but sell the story, sell the solution in words.
I think, in terms of communication style, it varies by country, but also probably by level. So there's the direct style. In the West, it's tell us, make the proof that this thing is going to work, and then take us through it, and then tell us what you just told us again. There's a certain style of selling people in. There are other countries that are more indirect. And so, Africa, I know you've done a lot of work in Africa, so that's a very indirect storytelling, anecdotal culture. And there are many more probably in the UAE. I'm curious if you adjust that storytelling, or you find that it needs to be more layered, more anecdotal in different countries. And I have to ask, this is a 2-part question. You're probably maybe the first Black American man coming into some of these spaces. What have you experienced? And maybe that's not true. Has there been a different way that you've been acknowledged, experienced, or things that you've had to navigate in those spaces and places where the proximity to and the perceptions need to be adjusted to those conversations so that they're hearing you in a different way?
So here's
2-parter.
here's my take, the Ron Thomas quick version, is that I've been more accepted in the countries I travel in than I ever was in U.S. Because they see when I go to Saudi, everybody in the room looks like me or a shade of me, as well as the UAE. So it's totally different as it relates to that. So I've never really experienced what I've experienced in levels of meetings inside of New York, or high level meetings where you may be the only one sitting in that meeting. But again, in order to make those solutions and to become successful, as far as the organization is concerned, I just focused on getting people to know who I was, spending time with them to try and make that happen. So from that vantage point, not so much. But again, when you think about, and I'll give you a Saudi culture, I learned so much from living in Saudi. Because in New York, you go into a meeting, you've got half hour, you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to get right into it. And I go into a meeting, high level meeting, and when it comes to me, I'm saying, well, here's what, and I'm right away going into the sell. And the CEO is sitting there listening. He says, so Ron, how have you been? How was your weekend?
How's the family?
How's the family doing? How's your stay since you've been? Let's talk about that first, and then we'll get to that point. And I'm always listening and interpreting. I said, learning point, take some time, tell the story, get to connect with people, then you weave in your presentation solution or whatever you want to call it. Stop this getting to the point. And again, so but are you the type person that will learn from that? Or are you the type person that completely ignores that? Yeah, well, everybody's doing fine. But here's what I was talking about here. You have to be receptive to challenging the way that you think. Because the way that you think, and out of X amount of years, you've always thought that was the right way to approach it. based on your successes, you go into a different culture that's totally different.
So let's get into the culture, workforce culture perspectives,
Okay.
and how leaders are thinking about it changing, how they think about the people. What do you see and hear across the regions that you work in?
Different regions, different perspectives. The workforce in the APAC region is considerably younger, average age for the workforce. It's a younger workforce. So the leaders tend to be younger and they tend to want to explore different things. In the Middle East, it's people that have been in positions for 20 years, 30 years. I had a client, I won't mention the client, the entire C suite started at the company right out of university. And their entire perspective was in that one company. They didn't understand the whole AI piece. They didn't even understand the digitization that the industry was going through and how their compensation level was going to have to explode because you're not going to hire the digitization people you need. And every reference point was, I've been in this company for 30 years and we've done it this way. That is the challenge that happens. But here's some research I read that the younger a C suite, and I tell HR people, I said, do a quick average. Look at the average age per level, average age C suite, average age to the succession of going into the C suite, average age for the digitalization, which is all younger people. So certain things are going to pop out. The younger people, you're going to have more turnover, more not connecting to culture because you're doing things the way that it was done when their parents were alive, when their parents were living, or when their parents were working. And you're going to have to try and understand the nuances of that. So how do you navigate the C-suite whose average tenure could be 15 years in a company, and you have someone that may have the turnover is 1.5 years. But this is where all the talent is. How do you connect those two? So lots of times, C-suite will say, well, yeah, my door is always open. Your door is not open. Your door is open to listening what you want to listen to. But is your door open to listening to something that's going to disrupt your entire way of thinking? And I'll give you a perfect example of that. I did a keynote speech in Karachi or Lahore, Pakistan last year. And I'm coming up the next day, and I'm sitting there listening to all the so-called big shots, and they're talking about, the next generation needs to learn this, and this is the way we're doing it, and the challenge with the younger people, and this going on and on and on. And I said, these dudes don't have a clue. All of them are old men. I said, I can't wait to get on that stage tomorrow morning. So what I did, I called up the young lady who does my slides, and I said, ditch all the slides. Here's what I want. I want this, I want this, I want this. Well, I said, I need this done tonight. I said, because I have to respond to that. And see, this is one of the things I say as a leader. Be willing to speak up. You're just sharing your opinion. So when I got it the next day, I said, I heard all the big talk about this, and we're going to move to here. I said, but I never heard a people component to that. The only people component I heard was that, the younger people need to realize this, or we need to be in 5 days a week, and all these kinds of things. And I said, if you had a strategy meeting and you realize your entire customer base was changing, would you still hold on to the way you're doing business, knowing that you're going to lose 50% of your customers and probably 50 to 70% of your revenue? I said, no, you would not. You would adjust. So I said, all of this talk I heard yesterday, it really, really kind of caused me to change all of the slide I'm going to talk through now. I said, because everything has changed. Everything has changed. So you're saying not adjust. They need to adjust. They don't need to adjust. They will leave and find a place that will adjust to them. Told the story.
So that's a great segue. So adjusting to them, there's generational differences, and they're making decisions with their feet. Their social contract is changing. What countries or industries, maybe, and maybe it's coming out of Asia, who do you think is really responding the most in terms of how they think about workplace culture and what's needed?
APAC is number one. Younger workforce, and they're willing to try things. They're willing to try, and they're willing to question, and the leaders are willing to listen. But the leaders in APAC region, for the most part, are younger leaders versus,
Yeah.
say in the Middle East, you have a lot of family-owned companies, all those kinds of things that go on. So that's kind of the key directive when you look at it through that lens of who's
Give
willing.
us an example of because when I was in grad school for org development, we had to go to different countries. And I remember being in Datong, and we were working with a leadership team at a tomato factory.
Hmm.
To your point, it was the younger people.
Yeah.
But what was interesting was that they wanted to know how leadership was in the West. And I was more interested in how it was in the East.
Yeah.
So East and West leadership is a different style. Can you share what you notice? Any examples of what does it mean to be a young, and APAC is, many different countries with different styles and approaches. Any examples of what you think we can learn from some of the young, brilliant leaders in APAC? Because I've learned quite a lot having worked with leaders in that region as well.
Yeah. There was an article the other day concerning that same point that you're talking about and those leaders and how they respond to that. I did some work for Sephora, and Sephora, each one of their leaders inside of the headquarters has to spend one day in the store. The CEO, CHRO for UPS, he gets on the truck one time a month and he rides the truck. There was an article written about get out of the boardroom.
Regardless of their role,
What's that?
regardless of their role, everyone had
Regardless
to
of
do
their
it.
role.
Love it.
So if you think of the CEO writing and delivering packages, think how much he's learning about his organization. So there was an article written that says, get out of the boardroom, go to the break room and listen. Because the Home Depot just started the same thing. So Home Depot says all their leaders come out and let's move into get a thorough understanding of what the worker is feeling. And this is why all that's important, because the next level of leaders, your entire workforce is shifting. COVID was the beginning of it, and then AI is the icing on the cake. And you're trying to figure out and design a new workforce today. But the product is different. The ingredients are different. The ingredients now is a younger workforce who has skills, and they don't have to stay, and they're not looking to stay with you for 25 years and get a watch. I told someone the other day the watch business for service is over with. They're not going to stay that long. And realize that, but you build the kind of environment that people want to stay. One company, which I really admire, I forget the name of it now, when a person decides to leave, they have a going away party. It's an explore. If it doesn't work out, you can always come back and compete for another job. This is the kind of approach you have to have. Everyone that works for me works all over U.S., Philippines, in Dubai, and it's all online. And I hired someone.
So as you know, there's a lot of resistance, especially from multinationals. Even after coming out of COVID, there's a lot of conversation about wanting people to come into the office. I did notice that in different countries all over the world, the culture of coming into the office can be very different, and there's less resistance in certain cultures in certain countries than others.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of discussion about why, there's they find research that says that productivity is down, but young people, and one of the things that I found is because of COVID, it really elevated and brought to life the different needs of people. So whether it's families or people that are caregivers, people that may not have the transportation necessary. In London, the big challenge is that it's very expensive to be in London. So young people have moved out, and it takes them longer. It's more expensive to come in. And then when you get in the office, we all know that you're in a pit. And so the noise level, if you're introverted, if you have sound and neurodiverse needs, it's not a comfortable place. If you have a physical or non-physical disability, you're less comfortable being in the office. There's a tension. There'll always be a tension. What is the conversation inside the rooms where it happens about that dynamic?
It's kind of push and pull, back and forth. But again, it depends upon the organization. It depends upon the structure of the organization. It depends upon the region. There's a lot of things that go into that. But what I say is that, are they doing the work? Can they do the work? Why? Who says that me coming in 9 o'clock, punching a clock, and punching a clock out at 5 o'clock, that I was productive? If I can set my own schedule to do whatever I need to do, why should we matter? And what I was telling you, that I hired people from across, the young lady that I hired from the Philippines, the first month, she sent me a spreadsheet and basically told me what she was doing each hour of the day. And I said, why are you sending me this? She said, I want to account for the hours. I said, never, ever do that again. I said, I could care less. You know what you need to meet at the end of the month. Just do that. If you want to take a day off or do what you need to do, it's fine. But this is what I need by the end of the month. Why couldn't we all operate from that vantage point? But again, it comes back to the Henry Ford era of 9 to 5, 5 days a week. This is the way we do it. And the leaders who are putting in all of this kinds of, I don't know. I can go on and on.
Any companies that you say, wow, they are the role model that we should be thinking about in terms of rethinking culture, refitting culture? Who comes to mind as we can learn a lot from this company?
Well, I don't want to call names, but I know of companies that have progressive ideas. And one of the key points of progressive ideas is they listen to their people. Get out of the boardroom, talk to your people, find out from them what they feel that we can do to make this more culture driven or engage them. And when you do that, what happens is that even if you, and now your leader said, well, I don't want to set expectations. I said, you're having a conversation. You're not setting expectations. You're just saying, give me ideas. Stop thinking that the ideas come from the boardroom or come from an HR conference room. If you talk to your people, they will give you solutions to a lot of things. Can I use all of them? No. But they will put me on a different track because I don't know what it is to work on line one. I don't know what it is because we have a higher propensity of female workers who have gone out on maternity leave and they're struggling to come back after 6 weeks. I could not figure that out inside of a boardroom. But if I talk to them, if I pull those people together and say, give me some ideas, that's where the solution lies. And one of the things I have always been a big proponent of, walk the floors and talk to people, see what they're thinking. And when you do that, what happens is that you get a general idea, a better idea. One of the things, another thing I want to mention, I don't want to take a lot more time, is that I would always, when I was at head of HR, I'd always create my board of directors. And that board was normal. I didn't want any managers there for the most part, unless I knew it was a good manager. And by a good manager, people trusted that manager. And I wanted all of those people to sit around and just share ideas. So what do you think about this? How can we handle this coming from work from home, coming back from home, and all these kinds of things? Although I wasn't managing an HR department during that time, but this is what I would do. You look at Apple said, okay, it's over. Everybody come back into work 5 days a week. We have determined. Somebody sent a note said, who determined that? 5,000 people sent a letter back and said, who determined this? Do you think it would have been better if you would have asked us?
So there's a conversation that says, we look to the top for change. We look to leaders to guide how change happens. What's your perspective given the generational divide? We have 5 generations in the workplace. The younger generation is making changes and being very vocal. How can companies think about the generational differences in terms of transformation and change?
One of the other things that I do is that I am severely involved in coaching senior leaders. And one of the things I try and get through to them is that we have to listen more. You hear leaders say, well, my door's always open. I say, yeah, but nobody ever comes in the door because they know your attitude and they look at the way that you respond to people in meetings, you're short, curt. So why would somebody trust that you get it? And I think one of the major challenges in organizations today as it relates to culture, it starts at culture starts here. And I'm always amazed by the articles that says, well, my CEO asked me to really work on culture. I said, you should have asked him, what role are you going to play as it relates to culture? That could be a town hall meeting. That could be getting out of this room and coming down, having lunch with people. Something as simple as that. Sitting inside of one division. Your goal could be every month, I'm going to sit in one department for the entire day. I'm going to sit in your meetings. I'm going to understand how your business is done, all those kinds of things. When you connect to that, you're opening up a groundswell of people that have ideas that will never get to you. I always tell people, Google the term Iceberg of Ignorance.
Everything is underneath.
Everything underneath. And that shows you, it goes, and it's based on an org chart for people that don't understand that the org chart is here. And it says, who knows the problems inside of your organization? So they'll say C-suite, 10%. But it goes down, you know who knows all the problems? The workers, 100%. Now, whether that's actually accurate, but for the most part, it's the same thing. They have no clue as to what's happening. And the only way they're going to get that clue is to spend some time talking to people. And to give an example of one company, they had this contest. And the grand prize was to have dinner with the CEO and his wife. And I'm like, for a worker? And they're sitting there. First of all, the middle block that I'm sitting there with the CEO and his wife, who's whatever. I won't even go.
Right.
But what is that conversation?
That's not a prize.
You're afraid the entire time. Why don't you ask them, for people that win this award, you tell us what you need to do. We'll give you one weekend for you and your family, expenses paid to go to XYZ.
Exactly. Yes.
Only thing I ask is that let me get a photo of you on the plane or whatever it is in doing this, because we want to build this kind of culture inside of the organization. You know the impact that would have?
Huge.
Huge.
Yes.
Versus, well, we're going to go.
So we could go on for a while.
I know. Go ahead. Yeah.
Because I wanted to get into the engagement scores going down forever as a result of not paying attention. But I have 2 last questions for you that we will always ask our guests. One is, you've been a man, a citizen of the world. You've had experiences across the continent of Africa, APAC, the Middle East, all over Europe. What question is still on your mind about culture as a culturally curious person?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Well, I'm going to relate it back to integrating it back into C-suite and boards. My question is to every C-suite leader and every board leader, not so much of a question, but an affirmative, is that you're in charge of culture. You are the one that's in charge of culture. Get out of this big office, start spending time with your people. I'm not talking about your direct reports. Go all the way down to the bottom. Go to a factory, spend some time at the factory. The gentleman from UPS rides the truck. And that's the key to begin the process of building the culture. And you start listening to people more from the bottom than you do from the top. If there's something that you're really struggling with.
So, final question.
Okay.
We always want to collect tips, and you've given us so many gold nuggets in this whole conversation. Any last favorite tip that you may give your students or a C-suite or anyone that you come across around just navigating culture and culture fit?
Since we've been talking about the so-called C-suite, I always call them the big shots. Let's go down to the student. Let's go down to people coming out of university, of people that's been in a job that they really, really don't like the job. Explore. But one of the things you have to realize is that you have to build your brand. You are a product. Now, I know some people may take issue with that, but you're a product. And people are looking to hire a product that can come in and provide solutions. Someone will say, well, I got an MBA. Nobody cares. But can you give me 2 solutions that you have created that has had impact across an organization? Give me case studies that you developed to do that. You have to become a brand. I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, having to connect with me. Oh, they're not on social media. I said, excuse me? She said, they're not on social media. I said, LinkedIn? No, they don't do any social media. I said, there's no need to connect with me. What am I going to do? You have to build a brand, because if someone were to Google you, what would come up? And I always tell people, Google yourself. Go to ChatGPT and say, who is Ron Thomas, who's always talking? And see what comes up. Because if
you're the quintessential brand builder for sure.
You have to build a brand, but you're building a brand. If I'm trying to find a job, I'm trying to build a brand based on solutioning. And this is what it has to be about.
Yeah, having a point of view is so important. People want to be interested in what you think and what you can solve for.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great place to close out. Thank you so much, Ron, for all of your wisdom and your golden nuggets along the way. And hopefully in another future episode, we'll come back to you to learn where you are next.
Okay, cool. This was awesome. It was kind of like me, you talk about going to psychiatry and you lay on the couch. This was a laying on the couch session for me, because I got a chance to get a lot of things out that I wanted to get out and all of that. I was saying what I got to say.
Well, that says a lot, because I know you build a brand and you're everywhere. Yeah. So I'm glad it was productive for you as well. Thank you.
Okay.
It was such a great conversation. I learned so much, and there's so much more to learn. I hope you could pull away something that you can use. So please do follow us on Instagram at CultureREfit. And don't forget to subscribe and share on YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button, and please do share with your network. There are so many people that want to and need to hear these conversations, so we want to open it up to an amazing global community. Listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your podcasts and streams. Send your comments, ideas, questions, who you'd want us to have a conversation with. This is your global community. We're here every week, so join us next week for a new episode of Culture REfit. We have some great episodes and conversations coming up. Thank you. Bye.